Well, hey there, team. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to this new segment, Worth It Then, Worth It Now, where we go back and revisit some games that I've actually covered on the main channel. But I felt, they've stood out, they've stood the test of time. I wanted to go back and check them out and take an opportunity to shout them out yet again. And in this case, we're looking at Stronghold Definitive Edition. So, I've been playing this for a couple of hours just to dip back in, and it's cool. I've got a strange kind of nostalgia for it, as someone that never had nostalgia for Stronghold in the first place. I suppose to cover off, this is a pretty brick and mortar, basic remake, remaster, whatever you want to call it. It's such a broad term these days. You could do a whole video on it, but it's bringing forward the classic original Stronghold game and releasing it with a few modern sensibilities, think controls, hotkeys, that sort of stuff, the ability to move the camera around and rotate it. And one particularly helpful thing is pressing spacebar and being able to lower things down to the ground level so you can actually sort of see them without the sprite model popping out. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it becomes very difficult to build in a fixed isometric set when you need to make castle walls and all that don't have any gaps for dudes to squeeze through. But in that sort of pantheon that is the remake space, this is kind of what I would expect from, I don't know, I suppose you would call it a remaster. Graphics have had a little bit of a touch-up. The controls have had a modernization. It runs on modern rigs, which is a bigger problem more and more with older PC games. So, in a way, it's kind of a preservation effort of a classic for people to play it on, contemporary hardware. As opposed to, something like the Resident Evil 2s, which set a bit of a high standard where they fully redo the whole game kind of from the ground up, different perspectives and that sort of stuff. And I think it's unfair to expect that of most remaster type games. So anyway, I thought I'd take a moment to at least cover that off. This is the bare bones side, but I feel like that still keeps the spirit of the original game. As covered, I don't have nostalgia for the original. I never played it growing up. It was around, and for whatever reason, it was on my periphery. But I've really enjoyed coming back, checking this out again, having an open mind. Depends how you want to see it, right? One of the advantages of keeping this kind of intact is it does shine a light on, in a way, how kind of innovative some of the mechanics were around this game, but also how dated a lot of it is. And again, I'm going in with a kind of open mind in general, approaching this game and appreciating it despite its faults. I feel like if you're very picky, you might have a hard time and you don't have nostalgia, but at the other same end of it, there will be people with nostalgia glasses on. And me even trying to give even-handed criticism on dated mechanics will offend their sensibilities. You can't really win it either way. My point is that mechanically, while it was original at the time, there are some dated components to it. Before I let it get away, but it does tie into it. We'll talk about the core loop, but you can probably sort of divine it having a look at it, and maybe you've picked it up peripherally over the years, even if you never played it. But ultimately, you run a stronghold. The story is, carrot on a stick. It does its job. There are some variations where maybe you'll have to attack a castle and take it over and then refurb it, but at its core, it is kind of an economic simulator in a very rudimentary sense, mixed with defending your castle walls from an RTS perspective, which at the time would have been incredibly original. Turtling in a StarCraft base was, I suppose, a close comparison, but you're set on a fixed map and you want to basically build up your economy and wall it off, as in most scenarios, they will just send waves and waves of escalating troops at you and you have to defend against it. Now, the trick with the economy as it is it's a lot more mechanically rigid in the way that, like your little meeples, your little troopers will carry things from point A to point B. It's not something that, how do I put this? I used StarCraft as an example, right? You get Vespene gas or you get crystals or whatever, and they'll just carry it from the machine to your base and the number goes up. And that's pretty much as complicated as it gets. In this, even for example, we'll just use like one of the most entry-level buildings, like a woodcutter hut. You will essentially have to just place that. Now, your base will generate dudes over time. As long as you're in positive happiness, people will gather at your town center as long as you have houses to accommodate. So, once you've got a dude there, he will basically just automatically fill the woodcutter slot and he'll walk over. He will just manually mosey on at snail speed, relatively, go over and become a woodcutter. Then he will literally walk out to the nearest tree, cut that down, bring the logs back, and then he will fashion away. And it's cool watching all the little animations, but he'll carve up all the little bits of wood into the bits of plank, then he'll shoulder the planks and he'll carry them over to the storage, and it'll put it in the storage, and you'll never really get a printed number, but now you have the wood to work. And we've seen these sort of mechanics before, arguably kind of brought forward and cleaned up a little bit more. I know I'm not allowed to like it because it's an Ubisoft game, but the Settlers' New Allies did this, and it did it incredibly well, where every individual good was harvested, manufactured, and carried. But in that game, it was a little bit more, you would have like a hauler class of people. So while you'll have your workshops fashioning, little metal bars and smelting, and it was all really cool, you would have this whole secondary logistics system carrying the stuff to and from. My point is that it kept the throughput going. And even that game, I don't want to get sidetracked, but I think it's quite excellent. But even that pushed a lot of people's patience for that system. And I feel like it was probably the cleanest, fastest version I've seen. So the long and short of it is, often your missions will play out in this that you'll spend a whole bunch of your starting resources to build up some chunk of your beginning economy, and then you'll hit a bottleneck almost immediately while the workers start to work, right? And they will take 10 minutes to really get stuff going. So to call it kind of slow-paced, I think would be fair. It will test some people's patience. And I suppose the more immediate issue is it's difficult to get a fair readout on throughput and sort of really min-max those numbers. You could argue that this is just a different mechanic. It's a different flavor, right? And it's not going to be for everyone. But things like having your population grow and trying to support the food economy when you have all these different ways of doing food, like a hunter will go out and he will have to go and interact with a deer, hunt it, bring it back, skin it, put it into the storage, and he's doing all this on his own. So the delay on throughput from goods is really big in that case. Whereas, maybe you have like a dairy farm and they make cheese wheels that they'll milk the cows and all that, but relatively the throughput's kind of quick. So it can be tough to get an idea of where your granary is at and how full it is, or, if you're under or overperforming and how to course correct. And again, this isn't necessarily a complaint. Maybe you hear that and you go, oh, this is an interesting wrinkle on the system. I kind of like that. But so that's how their economy works. It's kind of slow and lumbering and difficult to quickly adjust. And then when you impose that against the military component, where you sort of have to press gang people into the military, you'll need tax money. You'll need, like, if you want to make a bowman, your Fletcher will have had to have made the bow, and he goes and grabs the wood, fletches it into the bow, picks the bow up, goes and puts it in the armory. And then if you recruit a dude, he'll go and grab the bow from the armory, and then finally he'll be a troop. So really sort of planning ahead is a big part of it. And it kind of does push up against that mechanic of, well, there's a shitload of enemies at the gates. If you're not ready, you're stuffed because it takes so long to build. Having said all of that, if you want to build castle walls, giant products of masonry, bazillion feet high, they just instantly slap down on the world. So, I don't know, maybe a little inconsistent. I'm not trying to be overly critical, but I am trying to let people know that maybe if you've made it this far and you're finally thinking about getting it, just be careful that you probably do need more patience than what you might be used to in modern gaming. But yeah, it was a treat to go back to it. I think it's worth chucking it out. I wouldn't be covering it again if I didn't stand by it. Like, I enjoy it as someone who never had nostalgia for it. I enjoyed it the first time around when I looked at it a year ago. I enjoyed it again this time. So it's really cool for newcomers and people that have nostalgia alike. So I'd say check it out if you haven't already. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.